Crave was conceived as a way to deliver our strong educational mission and our membership's desire for their continued learning. Through the Crave series, our chapter will deliver webinars and virtual meetings to deliver timely and relevant topics that are affecting our industry today.
It's about the effort that we expend to connect with people. But you have an opportunity to see people, you have an opportunity to chat with people. We may not have an opportunity to have appetizers and share a drink with each other, but we stay connected, and that's really the most important thing.
Being able to work together and learn together in a new format, a new environment, really helped us take those pre-existing relationships and friendships that I had to another level.
CoreNet has taken the leadership in these kinds of conversations for years and years, and so we're delighted to have this long-term relationship with CoreNet.
I found the CoreNet to be a great community of dedicated real estate professionals, and what it means to me is it gives me a wider network of people with whom to share ideas, to derive the best learnings, to test and experiment with things that I'm working on.
This program is all about personal growth and becoming the leader that you want to be.
CoreNet has always led the way when it comes to supporting the professional development of our members. Our roundtable discussions, our education workshops, and our professional development programs are just part of what makes CoreNet so valuable to our members. It was critical for us to find a way to still be able to facilitate all of this. Crave has provided us the platform to be just as effective and to still provide that value to our members in a virtual environment.
CoreNet not only provides a platform for different groups to come together regardless where you come from in terms of organization, but really help each member to feel like they belong in this organization.
We have a diverse membership base, and you will find that members come from all walks of life and from all over the world. However, it's still an area of focus for us to improve upon and to embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity through increasing awareness and taking action, as we know this will lead to more success for the organization and for our members.
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help.
We are living in challenging times. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity CoreNet New England program on our industry at a crossroads, where we will be discussing some complex, interesting, and many times difficult topics that we hope spark questions, raise awareness, and provide each of you with a learning experience that strengthens your understanding of equity, inclusion, and diversity, and helps strengthen EID in our culture. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mark Watkins. It is my pleasure to moderate today's program. CoreNet New England has made EID one of their top priorities and has membership which is passionate in supporting this effort. We are proud of our commitment to support EID. CoreNet Global has made it clear that it is also a priority. In the words of Spike Lee, do the right thing. You may have noticed, for example, that Starbucks recently announced that executive compensation will be tied to EID metrics. And NASDAQ is pushing to require the thousands of companies listed on its stock exchange to include women, racial minorities, and LGBT individuals on their boards. Education is critical for EID, and you are clearly interested in learning more on the subject, and that is a critical step. I am the Director of Global Real Estate for Thermo Fisher Scientific. I'm a member of the CoreNet New England Board of Directors. I help to support our Real Advantage Committee in addition to the EID Committee. I also support CoreNet Global's Finance Committee. We have an exciting program with an impressive panel of leaders that have great experience that we will be speaking with shortly. We don't have a lot of time. I'm going to quickly go over some general housekeeping items. We are active on social media. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn. If you have any information you'd like to share, please email Stephen Smith at Northstar. Some upcoming events on December 11th, Evolving Technologies and Approaches to Improve Employee Confidence in Returning to the Workplace. I think that's going to be a fantastic program, as is the next one. December 15th, The Future of Food at Work. And then on January 20th, we have CoreNet Community Celebration for the Awards, a fantastic event that I'd encourage you to join. CoreNet Global is organizing an EID certificate program. Some of you may have already joined. There are 7 programs. In order to get the certificate, you need to attend 6 of the sessions. More information can be found on the CoreNet Global website, or feel free to reach out to me for more information. We'd like to thank our corporate partners, as well as our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we would not be able to present these types of programs. Here are our platinum, our gold, and silver. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom, not in the chat. All questions and answers will be taken from Q&A. We encourage you to ask questions, and we'll be answering them at the end of the program. So, equity, inclusion, and diversity, in defining equity, inclusion, and diversity. There are a lot of definitions. In fact, when one of the big tech companies, I believe it was Google, was asked to define diversity, they said it was too broad to easily define. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusiveness is being asked to dance. And equity is being asked to help plan the party. I'm sure that is an analogy that you're familiar with. Diversity is broad. It is the diversity of identities like race and gender, current hot topics, and in some cases, ethnicity, religion, nationality, or sexual orientation. Inclusion is about folks with different identities, feeling or being valued, leveraged, and welcomed within a given setting. Equity is an approach that ensures everyone access to the same opportunities. Equity recognizes that advantages and barriers exist, and that as a result, we don't all start from the same place. Equity is a process that begins by acknowledging that unequal starting place and making a commitment to correct and address the imbalance. And in fact, one of our panelists introduced a new acronym to us, JEDI, and that adds justice. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is going to continue to evolve. There are many aspects of EID that we want to and will address as a committee, while at the same time, we feel it's important to first address recent events that are front of mind for all of us. This is just the beginning of this series, and we look forward into diving into all aspects of EID over the coming months and beyond. I would like to introduce you to our panelists, a group of leaders from diverse backgrounds. I do want to note that these are personal opinions and not those of our companies unless we say otherwise. First, I would like to introduce Brian Collins. Brian is the Senior Manager of Real Estate for Microsoft. I think that I actually have skipped over some slides, and I've got to apologize.
Nice.
Can we back up a few of the slides? And I apologize for that. I think I got ahead of myself. So the role that corporate real estate plays in EID, right? We're creating a culture. And as real estate professionals, we can drive that within our organization. And many of our companies are passionate about EID and are taking different steps forward to drive EID or diversity and inclusion or whatever the term is that the organization is using. And it's our job to help further those goals. Diversity is not always visible. There is a lot that you can see that is below the waterline. There are a few that are visible. And I think it's really important for us to remember that as we educate ourselves on EID. As I said earlier, we've got a very passionate group within CoreNet New England. This is a group of members that have volunteered their time to help put together this program. And a huge thanks to all of them. A lot of effort has gone into planning this program and future programs, and I can't thank them enough for all of their contributions. And now on to the introductions. So apologize for that. So Brian Collins, he's with Microsoft Corporation based in Redmond. He's currently responsible for leading Microsoft's real estate and workplace planning, accessibility, and change management initiatives. In addition, he leads the Microsoft Real Estate and Facilities Supported Employment Program. I want to share something with you that Brian gave me probably about 1.5 years ago. And it's Microsoft is pioneering efforts to support individuals with disabilities. And they have a mission, and it's very simple. Our mission is simple: partner with vendors and local employment agencies to make a substantial difference in the lives of people with developmental disabilities who might otherwise be overlooked in the job market. It's fantastic. They're ensuring that they have a pool of talent that comes from all walks of life.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Sandra St. Fleur. She is Head of Organizational Development and Learning at UCLA Health. She is a subject matter expert in the field of organizational development, talent management, and leadership development. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in performance improvement, business transformation, and executive coaching in healthcare, managed care, technology, and life sciences. She has led talent management and organizational development at Mass General Hospital, Sasaki, and MIT. Ron Marlowe, well, welcome, Sandra. Ron Marlowe is Director of Workforce Development and Alternative Education at a Boston area nonprofit. His career spans the public and not-for-profit sectors. He has led the development and delivery of workforce development programs targeted for adults and youth, English for speakers of other languages programming, 2 alternative education high schools, and other employment programs. He served as Vice President for Workforce Development with the National Urban League. He served as Undersecretary for Workforce Development for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, serving under Governor Patrick. He's led D&I for Mass Housing. He also served as the state's Assistant Secretary for Access and Opportunity, where he oversaw a comprehensive approach to diversity and inclusion across procurement, personnel, and policy platforms. We want to make this interactive and get some input from all of you. So we are going to go to Menti. If you haven't used Menti, you can launch it on your computer or your smartphone by going to www.menti.com and putting in the code 1845244. And you should be, it should launch the Menti website. So if you have pulled it up, you're going to be asked, has your company established EID as a priority? And I'm happy to see these results. There's a lot of yeses. It's nearly 80%. Clearly, companies are embracing this initiative. As we've discussed this with the panels as we prepared, I think we all expected that we'd see this. So that's a good start. I'm going to go on to the next question. But you can see that, you know, almost 85% of, 85% of companies have established EID within their organization. It's a priority. But there's 15% that are an opportunity. The next question, what is the one word that describes your organization's effort in EID? And you can provide 3 responses, and we're going to create a word cloud. And if you're familiar with word clouds, the more often a word is used, the larger it will be. Proactive, early stages is standing out. Leadership. And it's important that this starts with leadership. Proactive. We do have a non-existent, which is interesting and an opportunity. Communication is critical. Baby steps. Engaged, committed. I'm going to let it go a little bit further. You can see we've had 26, 27 respondents, but we think that this is a great way to get information from the members. Thoughtful, urgent, mission, strong, culture, needs improvement. This is, you know, it's going to continuously evolve. So, you know, continuous improvement, I think a lot of us have that mantra that's critical within EID as well. So I'm going to now move on to the panel. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to start off and ask you to tell us a bit about your role and why you think EID is important. And I'd like to start with you, Sandra.
Well, thank you for having me with you. It's a pleasure. I'll tell you a little bit about my relationship to EID and why I think it's important. Like most organizations I've been in, by virtue of my expertise, which is really looking at how to harmonize processes, people, and systems so that the organization functions more effectively. EID is always a thread that is part of my work. But really up until this year, it's always been an element that I looked at, and I've always, I've spent the majority of my time trying to get buy-in for. And depending on the organization that I am in, that buy-in can range from I don't really get it to but I want to you know, I get it, but I have other priorities, to, you know, I get it and this is urgent, right? So when I saw the word cloud where I saw, you know, proactive leadership and I saw early stages, that kind of encompassed my entire experience with
Sure.
with this, but it's really changed in the past year. And it's changed significantly. And I'm happy to talk about that, but I'll let the other panelists say a bit more before I add more.
I think we've all faced those challenges, but it is becoming more important across the board, especially in light of the recent events. So moving over to you, Brian, how would you say that your company has established EID as is important?
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here today, and looking forward.
Great to have you.
Thank you. So when I think about Microsoft's role in the communities that we live in and the world that we live in fact, it ties back to our mission to enable and empower every individual and every company on the planet to achieve more. And if we're going to meet that mission, we have to be inclusive of our communities and of people who live on the planet. So as I focus on people with disabilities, a number of things Microsoft is doing in around both the physical environment that we have and the services that we provide through corporate real estate is they have to be ready and inclusive for those folks to come and be successful at Microsoft. For example, the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, is arguably a low bar for entry, even the fact that it's been around for 30 years this year. And we look for ways of bringing in that community to be more inclusive, to participate. In fact, there's a great saying, which I think implies to EID across the board, which is nothing about us without us. So we're looking to create a platform for those folks to get engaged and be successful when they come to work at Microsoft.
I love that term. And then moving over to Ron, tell us a bit about your role and why you think EID is important.
First of all, thank you, Mark, for the invitation, and it's good to be with my fellow panel members. My current role does not have me formally engaged in EID, but it doesn't mean there's not a role for me in EID. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you think about it, our organizations are nothing but microcosms of the larger society in which we live. They're microcosms of the communities in which we call home. They're microcosms of other organizations of which we're a part. And so that means that I have a role in trying to bring about a basic set of fairness, basic set of inclusions, giving people agency, if you will, because if we say we live in a meritocracy and we want to live in a meritocracy, then the question becomes, how do we make sure that our systems afford an opportunity for each and every person to bring value to the organizations of which we're a part? And at the end of the day, that's really what EID is about. It's about empowering individuals so that they can best exhibit the strengths that are inherent within them. It's about giving them agency. And so EID is not only important because it makes for a stronger team, it's important because think about how we are socialized at work. We spend most of our time at work. We develop norms that we bring into the broader society from the norms we encounter at work. And if in fact, we can start by making our workplaces more fair, more equitable, more inclusive, more diverse, again, enhancing the inherent qualities of the team, functioning as a team, we can do the same for the broader communities and society in which we live.
And bringing your best self to work. You know,
Amen.
Study after study shows that organizations that embrace EID are much more successful. They have better profitability. They introduce better products and services. They have a better workforce, lower absenteeism, and are just a much more successful organization that drives a stronger culture across the board. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm not going to pose this to anybody, so whoever would like to go first, please do so. How has your EID work been impacted over the last few months or since the pandemic has started.
Yeah.
I'm happy. Ron, do you want to go first?
No, I defer, Sandra, go.
Thank you, Ron. It's interesting, Mark, what you said about the value proposition for EID, because it's what I've always used in order to make a compelling argument for EID in the workplace. It's something that is not only good for the community, good for the ecosystem, but it's good for business. And I think what has changed since the pandemic is the sense of urgency. And let me speak strictly for UCLA. And in order to understand that, it's important to note that UCLA is actually 3 different entities that make up what people think of as UCLA. So there's the academic side, there's the hospital health system side, and then there's the what we call the school side. So the School of Medicine, the School of Dentistry, the School of Psychiatry, et cetera, et cetera. So it's those 3 entities combined that make up UCLA. And so when we're talking about equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion, these components show up very differently depending on the space we're talking about, right? And since the pandemic, it's taken on a sense of urgency because in the health system, the people affected by COVID, right, disproportionately affected by COVID, oftentimes work in the hospital system, right? But
Yes.
it's not limited to them, right? Because we know the pandemic's affected working moms more than other groups, right? And so we've had to look at that. In the School of Medicine side, it's really affected us in terms of inclusion, because oftentimes, I can't tell you the number of petitions we received that call for very specific action from the schools, right? And on the academic side, it's really called for all of the above. And so it's really taken on a sense of urgency and not just urgency, but a sense of we're holding you accountable now in a way that we never have before. And to be fair, leaders are holding themselves accountable in a way that they never had before. They're really stepping into that leadership void and they're saying, I get it and I'm all in. And so that's how I see the pandemic. And let us not forget about George Floyd as well. It's the combination of those 2 things that have created a moment when both leaders and followers are creating a very different relationship to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah, those are some very strong points, and you've got an interesting vantage point being at UCLA and having those different campuses and different backgrounds. So, Brian, were you going to say something?
Sure. As it pertains to COVID, I think we looked at 3 very specific areas. One being very practical, covering cost of stipend for furniture to help people be practical and work from home. I'm sure a lot of folks are doing that. But we also had a great emphasis on caregiver leave programs. We know that in these times where people are at home, and particularly during lockdowns, it was important to give people time off to care for those who needed it at home. And also a great emphasis on supporting mental wellness. So we made tools available for employees and an emphasis on managers demonstrating in a similar way that Sandra described, managers taking accountability to demonstrate good behaviors and best behaviors so their employees would follow. And then when I think about George Floyd and racial injustice, I think about the things that we've done in Microsoft internally and then externally. So internally in June, we made some announcements that were both long and short-term things that we were doing. So for example, internally in Microsoft, there's now greater emphasis on supporting mid-level manager programs to help people provide opportunities to nurture talent within the organization. And earlier in the year, we also, as part of our diversity and inclusion annual report, we looked at the numbers that we had in different minorities. So for example, in Microsoft, in the US, about 4.9% of the workforce is African American. However, that percentage of individual contributors is a little higher, and those in director roles or senior leadership roles is lower. So, and similar in a way with Hispanic groups. So we know that's public information. That's something that we want to improve and learn on, and we're committed to doing that. And then finally, from an external perspective, we looked at things like creating relationships. So one of the interesting things we did was partner with Black-owned banks and provided grants, $25 million grant, for example, to support minority-owned businesses across the US, as well as looking and expanding our pipeline of talent with HBCUs, historically Black, and universities and colleges.
So that's phenomenal and really interesting. The only way to measure performance is to, of course, measure it. And you guys, again, are pioneering that and are able to share that data. I can share with you that Thermo Fisher has also gotten involved after the George Floyd event. It started at the top with our leadership. There was communication that went out. But we also announced a significant donation of our diagnostic instruments, test kits, and related supplies, also to historically Black colleges, which have been impacted significantly, to help them provide a safe return to the campus. And it does need to start at the top. But in your comment on middle management, I was talking to another member the other day, and they have their leadership meeting. And given that it's all virtual now, they've started to open it up to middle management to strengthen that culture and connections with the leadership team, which I thought was really interesting and well done. So Ron, do you have any thoughts on the impact that COVID has had and what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I think that COVID has both exposed some of the inequities in our broader society, but they've also demonstrated the symbiotic nature, if you will, between our business and nonprofit and government entities and the broader society. What do I mean by that? If you look at who has been impacted in disparate ways by COVID, you see that Blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and other ethnic populations have been disproportionately impacted. But why is that? It speaks to broader issues around housing and density in housing, overcrowded in low income or affordable housing, whichever term you prefer, the disproportionate nature of who makes up the essential workforce, et cetera. And if you think about how companies have had to respond to the pandemic, their responses, they may think of it as simply as responding to their workers or responding to their employee base, but they are actually implementing responses that emanate from inequities in our broader society that have an impact in the workplace. And they're just doing what makes sense to keep their workplace as productive as possible, which brings us back to the initial point. Equity, diversity, and inclusion, wherever it is practiced, makes for a better team, no matter where that team is located. And even now, as we've come to wrestle with when the team is located remotely. And so, again, I would just highlight the fact that wherever we exist, we have a role to exercise EID, because we don't exist in vacuums. We exist in interconnected systems or ecosystems that either positively reinforce each other or negatively reinforce.
Oh, yes, it can handicap you if you're not addressing this. We're navigating through some challenging and areas we've never had to deal with before. It seems that safety was the first concern, ensuring all employees and visitors to our sites, safety was taken care of. But it's a brand new pandemic that we don't have a lot of experience with. It's amazed me here at Thermo Fisher how much everybody has come together to develop solutions to ensure that we do have a safe environment. Mm-hmm. I want to go on to a Menti question to ask the members. The question is, so if you can launch Menti again, hopefully you still have it open. If not, if you can go back to menti.com. The question is, does your organization have a dedicated individual who focuses on equity, inclusion, and diversity initiatives? And, there are different terms. It's, diversity and inclusion is what I remember it originally starting off as. And it's evolved and expanded. We are using EID today. It may change in the future. So this is interesting. We have 25 respondents, 50, almost 46% now, do have somebody that is dedicated and focused on EID. I did expect that to be higher. And it is increasing. We have about 30 respondents now. We're at 53%. At Thermo Fisher, we have a team. And Ron, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, Mark. I just wanted to say, there is an interesting conundrum that I think the poll results or the respondent results demonstrates. There are some who believe that, the EID functions, however named, should reside in a particular individual who's charged with leading change, but there's another school of thought that says that, if in fact, no matter where we exist in the organization, and depending upon what level of equity or inclusion or diversity we're talking about, it's a functionality that's owned at a minimum by senior leadership, and hopefully owned by everyone throughout the organization. And so when you put it in the hands of a single individual, that individual then is tasked with working through the internal bureaucracies and norms of the organization that don't necessarily change just because you put a single individual in charge of it. If
but
it's owned,
they should be able to push through it though, right?
You would hope, but in many instances, their efforts are frustrated because senior leadership, in particular, the highest senior leadership, has not fully bought in to the activities, even though they may have bought into the lingo of the moment, or may have bought into the enthusiasms of the moment. And so it's an interesting conundrum. And I say, EID works best when the CEO and everyone who's a part of the senior leadership team is on board with it, whether you place it in the hands of a single individual or you place it in the hands of each of those individuals.
Ron, I agree with you. That's super, super important. If it's important for my manager, and I have a male manager, so if it's important to him and his manager, it's important to me. But and that's maybe the kind of stick part. But I think what we found is there's a carrot piece to this as well. When we think about acknowledging and rewarding folks who make a difference in this area, others start to follow when they recognize it's important to the company, it's the right thing to do. So after we're told to do those things, maybe to begin with in organizations, when we see it as part of built into the culture, built into the mindset of individuals in the company, that's when it really starts to grow and spread.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Yeah. And just real quick,
second part of the question that I'm going to ask, and then I'll let you go on. Sure. If your organization has a dedicated individual, are they in-house or not? So go ahead, Ron.
Now, while people are responding, again, we tend to think of EID as a set of activities as opposed to changing norms and changing culture. And yes, activities flow from culture, but the reason why it's very hard work is you're asking individuals to fundamentally change how they've operated within an organization up to this point in time. And there are some people who are on board with that, but not sure what that change entails. And then let's not be unclear about this. There are some people who are not on board with it, either because they don't understand why there's a need for change or because they see threats to themselves within that change.
You're absolutely right.
I just want to jump in here for a moment, because I think that oftentimes when we're talking about EID, we talk about it as if it is this monolithic thing. But really, what we're talking about is three parts, right? Some that Brian and Ron have alluded to. So there's the experience of EID, right? So how do I experience the environment, right? There's the culture piece, which is what do we value really? Not just what we say we value versus what we demonstrate we value. And then there's the structural piece, right? These are the things that uphold a certain system, despite what we believe, despite what we want, despite what we value. And oftentimes the reason it's so hard for organizations to move the dial on EDI is because they're not sure which of those parts they're tackling. Right? Are they creating an experience which is oftentimes about inclusion and engagement? Are they tackling the culture, which is often about value system and belief system? Are they tackling the structure, which is really about equity and the barriers to equity? And so it's hard for people to know where to start, because to Ron's point, this stuff is really hard. That said, it doesn't mean that the work is not happening. It tends to happen organically, which means it's happening in a way that's not visible. And so just because you have X percentage of people, organizations that don't have somebody dedicated, doesn't mean that the work is not taking place. And to Ron's point, just because you have somebody dedicated, it doesn't mean that the environment creates the conditions for that person to further the work. It just depends on where the leaders are in their understanding, one, their commitment, two, in their follow through, three.
Very good point, especially for companies that are smaller or younger. And, they may have programs, but not a dedicated resource, because they understand it's a critical initiative for them to be embracing.
And they might be able to do more because they're more agile, right? There's less bureaucracy to get through, right? So what I've learned about EID in the decade plus I've been doing it is that nothing about it is one size fits all. But we've reached a tipping point where people want to do something. They just don't know what to do.
Many people do want to do something. You're right. Sorry.
Yeah, oftentimes they just don't know where to start and they don't know what to do. This is why conversations like these are so important, because it's an opportunity for us to understand we're all co-creating the future. Right? That none of us has a monopoly on how to do this right or how to do this well. In fact, there isn't a singular right way. It's all of the things that we need to do, whether it's donating equipment, whether it's funding, working parents, whether it's creating opportunities for representation. It's all of those things combined, right? That's creating a living roadmap for all of us to follow.
And if I could just jump in just really, really quick. Language matters. what we've learned in the social science work, if you will, is that if you start an effort from a deficit or from a negative perception, it will greatly shape how not only you view the work, but how others. But if you started from a positive or an asset-based standpoint, people feel better, people feel good, people feel engaged. So you can't start EDI work from a negative place of we're doing terrible in EDI, or this organization is not a great place for X and it's a terrible place for Y. You started back, Mark, with something you said about the fact that organizations that figure out how to pull out the best in their employees, which is consistent with doing good EDI work, will achieve more, do more, be better. But guess what? If you start from that asset place, you'll probably get quicker and more buy-in across the organization than if you started from a deficit place.
Interesting. So I've got one more question to tag on to that. How recent is the creation of this role within your organization? At Thermo Fisher, we've had leadership that's embraced D&I before I think it was even a term, going back close to 20 years, and our CEO is always very passionate about it. And I can remember once we had a D&I leader, this was probably about 5 years ago. We didn't initially have somebody responsible for D&I. It was just part of the communication and our culture and what have you. And one of the first things he said to me is, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I want to, weave it into this culture and make sure that D&I, which is the term that we're using at Thermo Fisher, is strong and passionate throughout the workforce, and I'm no longer needed, which I thought was interesting. So just looking at these results, how recent is the creation of this role within your organization? Wow, 39% within the last year, 40%. So I think the events that have been happening over the past 9 months have certainly, to the points that you've all made, prioritized creating an organization.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ron.
No, go on, Brian. You go first.
I was just thinking about this question in particular, and I guess if we had a follow-up question, it might be something like, how recent was the creation of certain ERGs in companies, employee resource groups or clubs, that brought people together on certain categories or topics, and I bet they've been around a lot longer and perhaps haven't been leveraged in a way. But I think you're right, Mark. What's happened over the recent history is companies are waking up and putting people accountable for delivering more in around this subject.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No. And the only thing I was going to add to what Brian was saying is, and it goes back to something Sandra said, EID or EDI in the HR space, you might have seen a much higher response rate in terms of a longer period of time of being active. EDI in the supplier diversity space may be newer. My only point is that EDI is typically, even in organizations that consider themselves good at it, is siloed in such a way that some EDI efforts are older or more embedded than others, because it's taken a while for the organization to see that EDI is as much a system as any other element of the organization is a part of the system, and that you can't do good EDI in the HR spot if you're not doing good EDI in the supplier diversity space. You can't do it in the supplier diversity space and do it well if, in fact, the only people invited to participate in the meetings, and I think you gave the example where middle managers are now invited, if all the meetings that are important only contain senior managers. And so again, it's a system, and it's a system-wide approach. And I think that question probably gets at and hits at that, oh, okay, we are talking about it more broadly, but we've only started talking about it more broadly recently.
No, and sometimes you don't have a choice. Right. Supplier diversity, to your point, if you don't make change, you're going to lose customers. Yeah. You're going to suffer. And it's a topic that we would like to have for a future program that we've been starting to discuss because we're hearing more and more about it. And again, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
So here's a question. You all work for some pretty large organizations. What advice would you give to smaller organizations that may not have teams dedicated to EID? And to the individuals in this session who want to know what they can personally do to help move the needle, to improve EID within their smaller company or organization?
If I were in their shoes, the place I would start is two-part, not necessarily in any order, but those are the things I would do. The first is that I would do an environmental scan to understand what's happening organically. Are people meeting informally? Are there networks, informal networks that people are using in order to come together and address EDI issues? So I would just do an environmental scan and see to what degree is EDI taking root in the organization where leaders are unaware. The other I would do is actually a good old-fashioned employee survey. I wouldn't use a traditional survey. I would use a pulse survey where employees could actually vote on other responses, because what that would do is identify where the energy is, and it would automatically prioritize the burning issues, and it would create transparency for the organization in a way that actually engenders ownership, so that people don't think leaders are going to fix this. The third thing I would do is put together a cross department, cross discipline task force or work team or whatever, anything but a committee, but I would put together like a cross-functional team to really start looking at the survey results, match that up with the environmental scan and say, okay, what can we do right away? What can we do near term? And what can we do long term? And actually report that out to the organization in a way that says, we're committed to this, but we're going to do it smartly and we're going to do it strategically so that we're not being reactive, which means it's not sustainable.
Excellent. Yeah. And, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And by prioritizing, you can go after that. And when you survey, you're going to get a lot of really good responses. That's my experience.
I think as the real estate guy on the panel, I'll acknowledge, and Mark and I were talking about this before the call, how long we've been around CoreNet. And I think about the early days of CoreNet, and there was a lot of white guys in suits at CoreNet events. And over time, we've seen now both male and female people still mainly wearing suits at our events. But we need to look around and we need to make sure that we are bringing more diversity into our chapters, into our summits, not just attending, but presenting as well. I kind of reflect on one of the big challenges that we have in our industry, an industry that's called corporate real estate. So how do we attract people into one of the worst branded industries on the planet? Like, nobody likes the word corporate and nobody likes the word real estate. And it's a fantastic industry to be in when you think about the diversity in categories that we have, from environmental, sustainability, design, facilities management, et cetera, and there's so many folks, I guess, probably out there in some of those tertiary industries. So we need to get them involved, engaged, and participating.
You're absolutely right. I'm going to cut you off because we've got a bunch of questions and only 5 minutes left. I will tell you, though, that we have an internship program where CoreNet has partnered with a firm called Crest to recruit students from diverse backgrounds and introduce them to corporate real estate. Amy has some questions that she is going to ask. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Amy.
Yeah, thanks for your questions thus far, participants. Actually, Brian, it's interesting that you took your last comment in that direction, because it's almost like you were a plant for a couple of questions from our audience members, Andrew and Bruce. So this is a question in two parts. The first part from Andrew is, our company has had difficulty finding and recruiting diverse talent in the CRE industry. Can you suggest any organizations or channels that we may explore to help us find a more diverse talent pool in our CRE industry? And that also leads into Bruce's question, which is, what specific steps would you recommend the CoreNet New England Board of Directors, there's 27 members, take to improve EID and our low diversity organization of 550 members? So I think those two questions are related, and I'll let you run with it.
Well, I'll start maybe, and I'd love for Sandra and Ron to jump in as well. But I'd acknowledge that there's no quick fixes to this. Just because you want to go out and hire diversity over the next year, I'm not sure that's the right modus operandi to get going on. If we want to change the world, it's going to take time. So, and we have to change it in different ways. So one of the ways might be to go out and look at future talent pool that I talked about earlier. So where do you get that talent pool? Another way, or another example I think is relevant, traditionally in the corporate real estate industry, we're highly outsourced, and we go to these big global companies to hire people. Think about in your local community going and hiring smaller companies that might be minority owned, veteran owned, disability owned, female owned. There's a lot out there, and that money that you invest in those companies usually go into directly back into the company to invest in those talent and the communities in which they live. I know Ron and Sandra will have more on this.
Just real quickly, I think that, Brian, you were on point. Because you mentioned earlier that your company, Microsoft, has started partnering with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, to find qualified individuals to take positions. Oftentimes, if you're a fisherman and you fish in a lake in which there are trout and you wonder why you never catch salmon, there's a reason. You got to go to a different fishing hole. And how you start to branch out and partner with HBCUs, with the National Urban League, which actually runs a very active recruitment program on behalf of different industries, then you'll start to see the diversity of your organizations improving. And I would caution, like Brian, that just because you launch it today does not mean tomorrow you will see tremendous uptick. But if you measure it over time, if you build those relationships, you build those partnerships, you will achieve the kind of diversity that you're seeking to achieve. And then once you get it, you got to be inclusive with individuals. Don't let them be seen and not heard, because then you get to the D and the I element of it. And then as they're being heard, engage them in meaningful ways in all of the activities of your companies, because then you get to the equity, going back to the Brian analogy earlier about the dance party. And so first of all, find out where your dance partners are. Secondly, invite them to dance. And third, but not least, help them plan the next and future parties.
Exactly.
I'd like to take 10 seconds and add something here, because I realize we just have 1 minute left. I'm a huge advocate of sponsorship. And sponsorship is different from mentoring in that senior, well-established leaders take a talented person under their wings and essentially groom them and actively seek opportunities for them to thrive. Sponsorships matter a lot, because you may very well have diversity in your environment and they're just not visible to you. And so if you have a sponsorship model where it is the responsibility of leaders to find that talent, groom that talent, and then open their Rolodex, an old-timey word, but open their Rolodex and make sure that that talent is seen by others, that will play a huge part in not only creating your talent pipeline, but diversifying your talent pipeline.
Absolutely. The more connections you have, the better. And to Ron's point, this impacts your reputation. And you spend years building your reputation, and it needs to be a reputation that helps you into the future. We're now at 1 o'clock, and we were concerned that we wouldn't have enough time for the questions, and we were right. We didn't get a chance to ask all the questions, but I cannot thank you all for participating today. This has been a great program. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope that our members are able to walk away with some more tools in their toolbox that they can bring back to work in their personal life and help strengthen EID within our culture. Like we do with all of our programs, we're going to circulate a survey asking everybody for feedback. So please let us know what we can do better, and if you have any ideas for any future programs on EID. I'd like to wish everybody a happy holiday, stay healthy, stay safe, and thank you again for joining us today. We're very much appreciative of your time.
Hey, Mark, can I just say something real quick?
Of course.
Thank you. One, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it immensely. And if anyone had a question that they want to direct to me and you email it to me, I'd be happy to give a response back to you, ronald.marlowe@gmail.com. And so I may not be industry specific or company specific, but I'm happy to give you an opinion.
That's fantastic. We appreciate that.
Ditto for me on LinkedIn. I guess that's the quickest way of connecting.
I'm not staying out. Yes, me too.
So I can connect you with everybody. So please reach out to me if you'd like to continue the discussion. And until we have our next EID program, we want to wish you a good holiday and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.